Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Words About Books. And it is special because my co-host, Nate, is not here with me. And so I'm joined today instead by friend of the show, PizzaSnail, aka Scott. He has been on the show once before where we talked about books and where to find them. And on that episode, I think we probably talked for about 2 hours at least. And I wound up having to cut most of it. And one of the things we got really off the rails on was mythology and archetypes and just sort of the roots of fiction and stories back when the line between fiction and nonfiction was very much blurred, more so than it is today.
It is? It's blurred today? Are you sure?
Well, I don't know if you want to discuss the modern mythology of QAnon, but...
No.
Yeah, that could be a whole different podcast. But so, yeah, we thought we'd sit down today. Nate needed a little break, so we're going to talk about mythology, archetypes, and how they relate. And since this is a book club style podcast, we did have a text we both kind of based our initial reading on, and that was Mythology, Timeless Tales of Gods and Heroes by Edith Hamilton, which I believe PizzaSnail found 2 copies of at a thrift store or a used bookshop.
Actually, it's a website called alibris.com. I love their website because you can get all kinds of used books from all over the country.
And it's pretty decent condition. I mean, 30-year-old paperback looks like it was used as a school book almost.
This is the book. This is not the version. This is not the edition. But this is the book we used in high school in English, in AP English.
I think we just had an English textbook that had divisions. Like it would have like Unit 4, 3 Shakespeare plays, Unit 5, couple of myths, Unit 6, poetry from different ages. We never had a complete unit on mythology in school. We didn't really make any special effort to learn the Greek myths. I think I kind of did that on my own.
We went through the whole book.
Wow. How long did that take?
I read it the first weekend we got it. Which was 40 years ago.
Oh my God.
But no, I did. Saturday and Sunday, that's all I did. I sat up in my room and put the headphones on and hooked into my boombox.
Well, 40 years ago, I mean, you're not that old. What would you have been? 13? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So, wow. That's what? 6th grade? 7th?
7th or 8th. I think 8th.
Okay. So, were you into writing fiction back then?
Oh, yeah. I started that it started as doodling, and this other guy and I started drawing pictures of like science fiction-y type vehicles and things like that. Yep. And then we actually wrote stuff up, and his mother typed it up for us. I think I have it here somewhere.
Oh, that's really cool.
About evil scientist Dr. Von Brain.
Well, there you go.
And the spaceships looked like bubbles with fins on the back end. And like 3 lines. That was the rocket exhaust.
It's better than my grade school Dragon Ball Z fan fiction.
Well, but it's still writing.
I suppose. Yeah, I may have copies of that laying around my house, and they will never see the light of day. I don't have enough self-esteem to show those.
All right. I won't push on it, but
I'll show them to you. I won't show them to the internet.
No, that's the Dr. Von Brain thing I would talk about. And that's never seen the light of day until I'm long gone.
Yeah.
At which point, I probably won't mind. Unless they've scanned me into the internet, then I'll be pissed.
Oh, yeah. No, if it earns some royalties for your heirs, good for them.
It will not earn royalties for anyone. It's not, no.
So, coming to mythology that young, as somebody who was interested in writing, did you notice just how many stories are kind of tweaked versions of myths? And by tweaked, I mean, some of them to a greater or lesser degree, but by inches, we've kind of been, like the Joseph Campbell thing, we kind of build up from the same archetypes.
Right. And the Joseph Campbell thing, I think I've got at least one of his books around here somewhere, but I know more of him from the Bill Moyer TV series.
I don't think I know that.
Oh, it's one thing to read Joseph Campbell's words, because I've read some articles and things by him. But to hear him articulate it verbally, there's nothing like it. And to see the look on his face, the excitement that he felt, even in his, later years, was amazing.
Yeah, he was an interesting guy. I think I've only read, now I'm going to forget the book I read. But I remember reading something that was kind of a compilation of notes from a documentary that was made about him, that they had all this leftover material, and after he died, they didn't know what to do with it. And so I think they've since put it together into some kind of exhibit or something, but they also wrote a book with a lot of transcripts of the interviews with him. And I know with Joseph Campbell, you kind of get the Jungian archetypes, and some of that goes to a weird political place. I'm not really into that side of it so much. Like there's a lot of gurus out there that point to archetypes and religion and politics, and I don't want to get into that, but I do like the notion of archetypes because you do see these same things play out again and again, like the wise old man, the young hero, the call to adventure,
the kung fu of it all.
Yeah,
where you have the master and the student, and then eventually the student exceeds the master. And mythology, that's everywhere. And I know we had said maybe not start with Greek mythology, but, Zeus killed his own father, who was the master of the universe until then. Mm-hmm. So it's the same kind of a thing, maybe in an extreme sense that, he killed his father, but he took over as the master at that point.
Oh, and then you have all the stories after that of Zeus's children and their quests to avoid being killed by either Zeus or his vengeful wife.
And their children.
Yeah.
the goddesses and gods and the demigods and the horse people.
The horse people?
Yes.
There were horse people. And cow people. And goat people. So you mentioned different mythologies, and I know we both read specifically Edith Hamilton's introduction.
Yes.
And I'll let you start with that because there were a couple of things in there you really liked.
I really liked the fact that she pointed to the mythology of the Greeks as obviously having come from what was prior, from like the Babylonians.
Yeah.
But they became human. These gods were brought down to our level in a sense. So they were actually made in our image and not the other way around. Whereas you've got the Egyptians who had all these animal type gods and goddesses and like nature more than in some sense, because you got the sun and the moon and those aspects of nature. But Egypt back then too was, at the height of civilization because the Nile River basin was so fertile. It wasn't the desert that much of it is today.
Oh yeah, they owned all the food and everybody came to trade with them for the food.
Oh yeah, that.
I haven't read a ton of writing from that period, but when you read things like Plato, there's a way he speaks about the Egyptians that he doesn't seem to consider them to be barbarians. He seems to consider them to be like a near peer civilization to the Greeks.
And I guess I could see that, but I think there was a difference in that their religion created, or that they created their religion from, that to the Greeks may have seen them as barbarians. And I think that's what the intent of the writing was in that introduction.
I don't know enough about Egyptian mythology to say that Edith Hamilton said anything wrong in her introduction. She obviously loves the Greek myths a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I really enjoyed her discussion of how specifically like Zeus evolves over time.
They all did.
Yeah, from this chaotic kind of like bad boy doing whatever he wants figure to in the later myths where people still believed in them as religion, he becomes almost kind of a wise father figure and all his indiscretions are downplayed, but it's too late because it's already like the legend of Zeus has already spread from town to town, and what every town believes about him gets absorbed. And sometimes different gods were like, oh, you got a sky god, we got a sky god. It's the same god. So all the stories about our sky god are now stories about your sky god.
Which I think back before the internet and back before much writing went on was common.
Well, I could be wrong, but it seems to me like in Greece and even Egypt to a lesser extent, there was not a big emphasis placed on canon. Like there were always a couple of guys who came along and said, no, we're worshiping this way. This is the rule. And then like they were quickly gotten rid of. That seems to be like a very Judeo-Christian Abrahamic faith thing. The idea of there is a written canon. These are the stories. These are the only stories.
Well, and you look at the Egyptian Book of the Dead as an example of that. And I think that it's more than, because we only have bits and pieces of it, is my understanding. That I don't think it was a book. That's my personal belief, just from watching thousands of hours of the History Channel.
Oh, boy. That could go either way. The History Channel gets...
Now, the good stuff. Where they show an archaeologist in the desert taking stuff up and looking at it and going, well, this is what we think this week.
Not the Ancient Aliens guy.
Oh, that guy I watched just for humor.
The Anunnaki did it all.
Right.
The reason that the ancient Egyptian gods have animal heads is because they're literal aliens from another world where the aliens look exactly human from the neck down, but they have the head of a jackal. And our Earth jackal, and it's weird.
Yeah, you're not allowed any more caffeinated beverages this evening.
Well, and the History Channel used to be significantly more reputable than it currently is.
But mermaids are real, Ben.
Oh, that was when they died. That was the day the History Channel died.
Well, when they tried to pass it off as real.
Yeah.
And they continued to try to pass it off as real.
That's fine if you're on the Sci-Fi Channel, because you're on the Sci-Fi Channel.
It'd be okay if you were on the Weed Channel. It is not okay on the History Channel.
That's an interesting thing, too, because Greek mythology did sort of become canonized, or at least a couple of people tried to canonize it. And Edith Hamilton talks about that, too, and where she draws her sources. And it seems like she acknowledges the natural drift over time, that the stories changed, that they absorbed other stories, that certain gods changed personality, may have previously been two gods. And that's another thing I hear in Norse mythology. I read a bunch of Norse myths translated by a guy named Jackson Crawford, who also has a YouTube channel. And one of the things he is constantly dealing with people who come in with assumptions about Norse mythology, is that things like Thor is the god of thunder and Loki is the god of mischief. And that's not really how Norse gods work. They're kind of more personalities. They don't really have set domains and jobs. There's just a few stories about them. And like Thor may be associated with thunder. Loki is obviously associated with mischief, but he's not specifically the god of mischief. Like other gods can do mischief. And I think it seems like that's, from what Hamilton's saying, how Greek mythology started out as well. And this whole blending thing, I feel bad because whenever I talk to other people, I feel like I always come back to the same three topics, but they're very interesting to me. And with mythology and the idea of canon, I come around to, the third point in my triangle, which is copyright. And more than copyright, like more than the legalities of copyright, just the notion of transforming what came before into something new.
It's art.
Yeah. And so it always interests me how much we can draw from Greek mythology, Norse mythology, because these are public domain things. The trope everybody talks about that superheroes are modern myth. They're mythological maybe in the sense that there were Greek heroes that were similar.
Yeah, I can see that. The demigods that were the children of gods and humans that had super strength, and they could run super fast, and they could do things that comic book superheroes today do.
I kind of wonder, do you consider mythology to be more in the vein of history or more in the vein of literature?
Yes, both. Absolutely both. It definitely became literature after the oral tradition, where it was passed down from generation to generation. And like you said, from town to town, where they may have had something like what we call a bard that would come, that would travel around in a cart with a horse and whatever. And the town would feed this guy, and he would pass along the news and the stories, and that's how he kind of paid his way, or it could be she, I don't know, in the world at that time. So the religion definitely influenced the literature, and the literature changed the religion all at the same time because of how it was passed along.
Do you think the people who heard the myths, who heard from the poets, really thought or even really cared if there actually was an Odysseus somewhere back in history?
I think they may have cared more than we do today, in the sense that they were closer to it. That though they were enlightened in a sense, a lot of the universe was still just this big, mysterious thing. They didn't necessarily understand, the electric properties of lightning, that kind of thing, like we do today. You know what I mean? When I hear the thunder, I don't immediately go, oh, there's Thor. And yet, as a child, what's the thunder? Oh, that's the angels bowling. I mean, that's a mythology in a way.
Yeah, it is.
And so, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I think we look back in history and go, these people were so naive. But were they? I don't really know. Considering the different aspects that the gods and goddesses and animal alien creatures brought to that, maybe not so much. Like Dionysus and his drug and alcohol and food-fueled orgies. That doesn't speak of naivete to me.
Well, no. There is that element of the filling in the gaps, and I know Edith Hamilton talks about how she likens mythology more to science than religion at one point, where she says that mythology wasn't religion in the way we think of it today, of like worship necessarily. It was more a way of explaining what happened, that lightning happened, like or a volcano explodes because Hephaestus is forging weapons, or lightning happens because Zeus is throwing lightning bolts at somebody.
Yeah.
I don't want to get political or anything, but that kind of filling in the gaps, I understand Edith Hamilton's point about science. It's obviously not the scientific method. They got to maybe the hypothesis stage, but then they don't test, they don't control, it just hadn't, and a lot of people just frankly don't have time to engage in that at this point in history. But we see that today. I mean, I joke about QAnon and stuff like that, but there is a lot of myth making where there are gaps in people's knowledge and they come up with some sort of scenario that explains the thing, and then lore starts building around it and stories start forming. It's an interesting part of the human psyche, I guess.
Before we knew what bacteria and viruses and prions and some other things are, they used to believe that the things that made you sick were little demons. They were little creatures. You know what I'm saying? So
the foul air.
Oh, yeah.
They got close. Yeah. I mean, they thought it was bad smells that caused the plague. And they were kind of right. If you were close enough to smell somebody who had the sickness, then you're close enough to catch it. He who
smelt it was going to get it.
He who smelt it died of the plague. We talked about that. We had an episode recently on a book called The Rack by John Bierce, which is about a disease spreading through a fantasy world. And in this fantasy world, there is magic. The disease winds up not being magical in nature. But it was really, one of the things that I found really interesting was because you know for a fact magic is real, you can't rule out the possibility that it is magical in nature. And that possibility being there leads me to keep going back to it. And every time I can't logically explain something the disease did, I don't look for more evidence. I just think, oh, it must be magic. There's something, what's going on with the magic? What's the story here? What's the reason? There is no reason. It's just a mechanical thing that I don't have I don't have the full 360 view of. I'm just seeing a piece of it, right, and it didn't make sense. But once I have the whole context, it'll make sense. Do you have a favorite flavor of mythology? Do you like the Greek myths?
I love the Greek myths. That's where I started. I can remember seeing Clash of the Titans, the first movie.
Oh, yeah.
As a little kid, and just fascinated that, they had a mechanical owl, dude. It was a mechanical owl. Being able to see the heroes brought to life in the form of that film, especially Medusa, And seeing, being able to watch how Medusa gets defeated, it was just, yeah, bonus points for me. Now, do I love Norse mythology? Yeah, because I like my heavy metal.
Yeah, it is kind of a prerequisite.
So, okay, this is perfect for this part of the conversation, where I talked about the bardic tradition of, the oral tradition of passing on the stories.
Yeah.
I'm going to actually relate it to something for me.
Okay.
I know that you've heard me tell a joke or two in my time.
Occasionally, yes, you indulge.
And my timing's pretty good. But I will frequently take a joke and alter it just a little bit because it just comes off better. And so the bards like to get fed, I'm sure. And so the better you could tell the story, maybe that meant embellishing it.
Oh, they had to spice it up, yeah.
Right.
Well, and people don't want to hear the same story over and over. They need a little flair.
That's right.
To that extent, it's a difficult thing because we're going to have to separate religion and politics from this. Do you think that allowing stories to transform is A, good, and B, have we lost something in our canon-obsessed age where everything has to be sort of solidified and the source material? We have the original texts. We're obsessive about keeping the original texts. And to some extent, we're obsessive about who has the authority to write a story. You can't write a Harry Potter story. You can write a Harry Potter fan fiction, but that is less than because you don't own Harry Potter.
That's true.
Have we lost something by coming up with this concept of intellectual property?
We've gained some other things, but yeah, we've lost something. I think that could be a whole podcast right there, a discussion of what I think of copyright law.
Well, that's I'm trying to avoid the laws in specific and more talk about like the philosophy of, I guess, derivative creativity.
So, okay, art is a perfect example of this. Da Vinci had students that copied the Mona Lisa.
Oh, you could go to the museum today and watch people copy the Mona Lisa. I mean, that's just how you study.
But they've actually found some examples where they've been able to, they use those fancy scanning technologies to look at the base canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's like the pencil or chalked or whatever they use drawing of the Mona Lisa, and they're all the same. And they didn't exactly say that Da Vinci drew all those, but it kind of sounded like that. But the students were expected to paint it. And the neat part was they were able to restore this one that I saw. So they could actually see what the woman looked like. Because Da Vinci's was more stylized, and these other ones were actually more realistic than his. So there's a form of artistic translation, or transmogrification, if you will. It's magic, if you think about it, in a way. Creativity is magic. Creativity is a spark that, how do you explain that?
I guess we're just going all the way into my douche philosophy corner, but...
Have we not been there the whole time? I didn't realize.
I suppose we've been there the whole time. It's that Dawkins idea of the meme, of ideas, and the human knowledge has an almost evolutionary mechanism built into it of random mutation in the copies. And if the mutation makes the story better or the communication more efficient, it's carried on.
Right. And I think trying to separate mythology from society, which unfortunately is, and it's tough to do, to separate it from the laws and to separate it from politics. We don't have to deal with it in modern terms.
Mm-hmm.
But the Greeks definitely believed that the gods gave them divine authority to rule. And the way they used that power was amazing. Look at what they gave the world.
Well, and the Greeks were also big on poets channeling some kind of divinity because imagination itself must come from somewhere, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting concept. It definitely follows with the mythology.
Well, I think that's where some of the woo-woo stuff of Jungian archetypes comes in, where there's a notion that there's some sort of dimension or something out there where there are like the pure platonic ideals of things and people, and that you can be some, to borrow like programmer terminology, that there's like a class, and then what exists in realities is derived from that class. So like there's some platonic ideal of a chair. Like there is somewhere in the universe, some dimension where there exists the pure essence of what it is to be a chair. And all chairs are some kind of derivative of that.
Well, in science, we talk about things happening in a pure vacuum when we're doing calculations in physics, say.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as a pure vacuum. And yet we can still use that idealized version of what we can create as a vacuum using, equipment in a lab that's close enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that's, there's some point in the great, human experiment, there is an idealized version of that vacuum, and then there's the real version. Because, yeah, I mean, you can have an idealized version of a chair that's got 4 legs and it's got a seat and a back, but some of them have, the little fancy spirally things on them, and some of them have a wicker seat. Those were designed by Satan himself. Those were not designed to be sat on by human beings. Yes, so I see what you're saying. There's all the different flavors.
Yeah, so if you apply that then to like the archetypes, so you have the hero or the wise old man, the maiden, mother, and crone, all the various things that seem to crop up in one way, shape, or form in every story. And it's also a little bit of nonsense, because the broader you generalize something, the more things are going to fit into it. And we could say that the Western concept of a witch is very different from the Eastern concept of what we would loosely translate as witch. And
yes.
At the essence of mythology is we're looking for, like, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm kind of spouting nonsense here, aren't I?
No, you're not. And I think I know where you're going. Is despite the chaos that it looks like in mythology, it's actually a people trying to organize the universe to make sense of things that don't always make sense.
Well, and there's two flavors of mythology. One, I think, is the explanation, where we assign personalities and personifications to things in nature to explain why they happen. The other is the Campbellian hero's journey, because every people, every culture has legendary heroes. And I guess we're kind of like myth and legend. I don't know if there's a difference in this context. I guess the legend doesn't necessarily try to explain nature. Maybe that's the difference. But like you've got Heracles, you've got King David, you've got Sigmund.
But you talk about legends, so it's like the legend of King Arthur.
Okay.
Is definitely, to me, it falls in the category of mythology.
I agree.
However, it fits your definition of a legend, which I would go with more than the mythology. And I think the legends, a lot of those tend to be possible.
Yeah, well, it's definitely easier to imagine there being a historic Arthur that has been embellished than it is to imagine that there was like a historic Zeus that threw something like lightning bolts. But
yeah,
I think the Arthur legend kind of goes along, though, with the Iliad and the Odyssey, which are the basis for a lot of the gods and goddesses we know in Greek mythology. Is in Arthurian legend, you get some lore. You don't get gods necessarily because of who recorded it, but you do get the Fae. You get Morgan,
magic,
you get Merlin, you get all this Anglo-Saxon / Celtic influence, and there was probably more to that. It's similar to the Beowulf story, where Beowulf thanks God so that the guy who's recording Beowulf doesn't get hung. One thing I wanted to come back to, though, because I'm harping on my copyright train, because as people who write, we're inspired by the stuff we read.
Absolutely.
And I'm not necessarily advocating fan fiction. I don't want to write fan fiction, but I do think it's interesting how something like King Arthur, these heroes transcend time because there's a million different stories about them and they're allowed to change. Well, I guess that's the interesting thing. You got the King David versus King Arthur. You can't write King David. I guess you could. You'd have to tread quite lightly if you wanted to write like a modern retelling of the David story.
It's been done. It is done all the time. Where you have this, and I'll give you the perfect example is, and you say you've got some little person that's been wronged by a big corporation.
Mm.
And they managed to win their lawsuit or get their payback, whatever that is. It's the same story.
Well, you get the David and Goliath trope a lot, but you don't necessarily get the whole follow through into becoming king and making some of the mistakes he made.
Right.
And they don't call it David, but you get 1,000 King Arthur movies.
Oh yeah, the Green Knights, all of it.
Yeah, and you know, the major reason for that being that Monty
Python and the Holy Grail.
Nobody worships King Arthur anymore. Nobody worships the Greek gods, so you can do that. But
yeah, do they not? Are you so sure?
Well, so that's an interesting point, and it has a little to do with what we're talking about, I guess. One of the things Edith Hamilton implied that I thought was interesting, because I just read another book called Drawing Down the Moon. I would have to look up who wrote it, but it was written by a woman who was an NPR journalist and also a Wiccan priestess.
Okay.
And it was all about the modern pagan movement, mostly in America, mostly in the 70s, I want to say. She did do an updated version. She has since passed away.
It was Margot Adler.
Yes, thank you. In that book, she writes that one of the things that put her on the path to Wicca was becoming obsessed with the Artemis Diana myths. I shouldn't say obsessed, just they resonated with her in a way that Bible school was not resonating with her. And she finds that that's pretty common. There's a lot of, like, Dianic Wicca is a thing.
Right.
And there's movements that follow Aphrodite, and there's all kinds of neo-pagan movements around the Greek gods. And Hamilton would, I think, see that as a giant step backwards. Did you get that vibe, or am I out of pocket here?
She might very well see it as a giant step backward based on her generation, that, you know, and her writing.
I thought it was an interesting sort of contrast to have read the two books at around the same time. Both of them love the Greek myths from totally different angles.
Oh, right, because if you're reading the Greek myths as religion, as a religious text, that's a completely different experience than reading it as just a book that describes what people used to think and believe in.
Well, and I think, Margot Adler, I don't think she thinks there is a literal Artemis. Like, I don't think she thinks Artemis is out there as a deity acting in the world. But it was just that resonated with her on some spiritual level.
It's more like the idealized version of that exists in some headspace, and it made sense to her. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was just really interesting to see Hamilton come at it from a position of, I like these myths because they're highly civilized and highly beautiful, and they're shining a light in the dark of a savage world. And then have Adler come at it from the angle of, no, they're deeply spiritual, and they connect with me on a human level, on some kind of basic primal level.
Right. Well, and I also think some of the Greek mythology, specifically, hid a bunch of the dark corners of Greek society. Because it wasn't all,
no
happiness and orgies. The way that they abused some of the lesser members of their society was not pretty.
No, and obviously they still had slaves, and democracy wasn't as universally popular among the Greeks as we may remember it to be. Like I've heard people say that a lot of Greeks used democracy as a slur for rule by mob.
Isn't it? Now, here's one for you. You know, where I was just thinking back to school. In second grade, I had to do a report on Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah.
And my favorite part of that report
I was trying to pronounce Quetzalcoatl.
No. I got that right away. I'm pretty good at that kind of stuff. No, it was using the colored pencils to draw in colored, it was like a coloring book page that I had gotten a hold of somewhere. But the Mayan stuff didn't, I guess it falls into the mythology track, but it was so close to modern times. I think when people talk about the Aztecs and the Mayans and, anything south of the United States, they think it was just all this time ago.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't.
Just a couple hundred years.
Yeah. They just disappeared.
Well,
they
ran
for the hills and they died.
They just vanished and nobody knows what happened.
Yeah. Those people were ancient aliens that were made out of gold, and
then
the Spanish took and melted them down.
Yeah, there were all these people here, and then one day they were just gone, and all these white people were here, and nobody knows what happened. So here's one for you. What do you think is the most likely to be remembered in a mythological way in the future of our modern fiction?
Oh, wow. All right.
Who's the King Arthur of our modern times?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk. God, I hope not. But you might be right. If he carves his face on Mars, maybe.
He already did. He's just come back in time to relive it.
He would. He would come back in time to relive a sculpting of himself.
Vladimir Putin would be somebody that, just because they're mythologized doesn't mean they were good either.
No.
Yeah.
It just means they need to be remembered.
Let's see. Bill Gates, who went from being the biggest a-hole you've ever met to the savior of mankind, in a sense.
And then back to the biggest a-hole with his latest scandals. Not the biggest, but an a-hole.
But yeah, so if you took the billionaire circle and mythologized them.
Do you think they'll last? If they,
I don't know how long they would last.
That's what I would be interested in, is will they tell the stories of the billionaires? So like, they're pretty sure there was a Trojan War.
I think they've actually just recently proven that there was.
Yeah. The Iliad and the Odyssey are probably based... Now, who knows if the main characters have anything in common with real people other than maybe a name. But I wonder, like, could World War II turn into that in 2,000 years? Or have we crossed the threshold of there's just always going to be the original texts? They're always going to have the perfect records to go back to.
They're not going to. Our technology doesn't last like that. If you look at... I know I read a whole article on this, and it hurt my head to read it, because it was all math. And it was, statistical math dealing with data corruption. Every time you copy it, so many bits get corrupted. And unless we come up with some perfect way of storing data, which we don't have, a bunch of it will just get lost. It will just there'll be nothing left of it. Or it will mutate on its own because of that data loss.
Yeah, they're going to have to fill in the gaps. Whoever's copying it is going to have to make an edit.
Like V'ger from the Star Trek The Motion Picture.
Well, yeah, because you see that all the time in speculative fiction. Like, you've got The Foundation and Dune, both of which nobody even remembers where Earth is. Nobody's even sure if Earth was the planet we originated from.
Or The 100 when they come down and one of the towns is Tondisi. Because it's from the Washington, D.C. billboard, and it's just missing everything but T-O-N-D-C.
Yeah.
And if you're not paying attention, you miss those little quirky things.
I don't know. Do we engage with our world and our stories in the same way? Is it going to be an actual war like World War II or the Trojan War that gets remembered? Or is it going to be Thanos snapping his fingers? Or are they going to jumble it all together? I wonder, though, if we're like mutating stories fast enough, because we do have artificial freezes in place in a way that they didn't before. Like, they obviously will still mutate given enough time. 50,000 years from now, this time is not going to be remembered with any degree of accuracy.
Except for this podcast right now.
Wouldn't that be hilarious if this is the only record that humans existed and they have to work backwards? They're like, okay, we got this one. It's a great one. They talk about mythology. It seems like they rambled a lot.
If you get time travel, wait till 2023 because next year we're getting the good vaccine.
Ah, yes. That will encourage them to come to our time.
Right. That's right.
Oh, dear. I wonder, like, how long will it take? Because you think about things like that. All the things that had to happen for it to get messy and transform. Like, nations had to crumble. People had to migrate.
The Library at Alexandria had to be burned to the ground.
Well, yeah. And so something similar, like, and I was reading a Dan Carlin book, and it was called, I read it right before COVID. I finished it March 15th of 2020. He said something like, there have always been these like civilization pausing or like rewinding events, like something that caused technology to move backwards. And either things are going to continue happening as they always have, things are going to move backwards. And he writes about Greek mercenaries finding like old Mesopotamian cities and wondering how the hell they built buildings that big because certain technologies have been lost, like certain kinds of mortars and stuff. And so either that'll continue on as it always has, where we're going to have these events, or we've established a society that has enough fail-safes that it'll never happen again.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that.
Which side do you want to put your money on, though?
Not that second one. I don't believe that we have the fail-safes.
It would seemingly take some kind of global event, for sure, to knock us out.
Okay, so you know about the seed bank, right?
Yeah.
You know that it's gotten warm enough there, they're getting scared that's not going to last.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to think that we could maintain that, but the Earth evolves just like people do. And so
sometimes we help.
Right. Sometimes we push the cart down the hill.
Yeah.
Why do you think Jack and Jill fell? Speaking of myths. There's a different kind of myth, though, when you start talking about fairy tales.
Oh, yeah. I have... I was actually coming to this problem with my bookshelves on Goodreads. I had to combine a couple of them into mythology and folklore because I couldn't keep putting certain nonfiction stuff in history, and I couldn't quite bring myself to put Bigfoot in mythology.
Dear Lord. The worst one would be having to take it out of mythology and putting it into nonfiction.
That would be the best thing.
We would so do a podcast that day. Right then, we wouldn't even wait. We'd just take the day off.
I would quit my job and go out to the Bigfoot reserve to work on, like, I would be the guy who hunts the poachers who hunt the Bigfoot.
As fast as you grow hair.
It would be dangerous for me.
You would be pushed out into the wilderness as soon as you got there.
I might be the one that can communicate with them. I might be the one
they think is Bigfoot.
Yes, I can bridge the gap between our peoples.
Wow. DNA no longer stands for what it used to. It now means just do not ask.
Oh, boy.
See Bigfoot? Do not ask. Yeah. That's like mob rule. When you said that, you know what it brought up in my mind? More old bastards. Because that's what the Greeks thought. They were being ruled by old people that didn't understand the young people. So, of course, they hated their government. Just like everybody else does.
I was going to say, I can't imagine what that must be like.
Oh, yeah. Actually, there was a thing I wrote in here about justice.
Oh, my gosh.
And you were talking about how Zeus changed over time, and so did a bunch of the other gods, where the gods like Zeus, who were all about war and killing other societies and all of that, became gods of the poor and the weak. They had they provided a sense anyway of social justice. where the gods were described as disappointed, disgusted, or downright angered when one of the lowly was ignored or turned away when in need. Which is, when they had the giant parties where they had all this food and all this wine and all of that was all given to the poor the next day. They would feed the poor with that.
So it's interesting because you're essentially describing the plot of the Nanowar music video where Odin becomes the master of IKEA.
That's right. Which they got from Mythology.
If you couldn't make a ton of unauthorized copies of Rick Astley singing Never Gonna Give You Up, edited into unexpected places, nobody would remember that song. And of all the songs in in that time period, would you have expected that one to become the legend?
But you just hit on it. That is who will survive 2,000 years right there, Rick Astley.
Rick Astley. Yeah, probably.
And he will be considered a god because he's never going to give you up.
And he never is going to let you down.
And for bringing it up, I love you as a friend, but I hate you for bringing up Rick Astley. Because another friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, doesn't mean to go find stuff to abuse me with Rick Astley. But when he finds it, it ends up being sent my way.
I'm never going to bring you up. But that's the disturbing thing. You know what I think I'm coming to the conclusion of here? I think I'm coming to the conclusion of kind of like memes are becoming mythology.
Well,
question.
Emojis have become modern hieroglyphs. So why not?
Just think about, Slender Man, or Slenderman as I call him.
Mothman.
That's a good one. We talk about
New Jersey Devil. What is that? Radiohead? What is that thing?
Siren Head. Siren Head.
That's it.
Radiohead's the band.
And they're creeps. The best kind, though.
No, all that SCP stuff.
Sure, why not?
I think the internet is the modern bard.
But yeah, this mythology stuff, it encompasses a lot more than I kind of thought it did. When I brought it up, I was thinking, we'll talk about Greek mythology and that'll be fun. There's a lot more to it. We need to do this again.
We can do it again. What would you suggest as a follow-up to this? This conversation was all over the place.
I think we should do some research on Egyptian mythology and cover just that.
Oh boy, that'd be interesting.
Because I think we are sorely lacking in that, even though, I don't know about you, but for me, I can see in my head, I can see the big statues and the obelisks and the pyramids and even the Egyptians and how they dressed in that era. And, from all this stuff that I've seen and read.
I want to say my most vivid recollection of Egyptian mythology, and I have no idea where I was taught this, was someone weighs your heart against a feather and there's a crocodile.
That's when you die, they weigh your heart, meaning your soul. It's all your deeds against the feather. And if it's heavier than the feather because of all the bad things you did, they feed you to the crocodile.
What if it's heavier than the feather because of all the cheese sticks I've eaten?
I think that's gluttony. That's a sin. Yeah.
Damn it.
You go to Gatorville for that.
You go to Gatortown.
Gatortown.
I guess that's probably a good point to end.
For now.
Yeah, I think we'll probably come back.
So, I have something to end with.
Oh, good.
It's the final thing that I made notes on.
All right.
Where I'm talking about mythology dealing with the birth, the death, and the afterlife. So at the beginning of this episode is the birth of our discussion of the mythology. The ending or the death of this episode is right now. It's happening.
It's happening.
Take a breath.
You're actively dying, Ben. Please shut your mic off.
And the next episode is the afterlife of it, where the cycle starts all over again.
Ah, I like that. Nate would remind me to tell the audience that next week we are getting a new Words About Books Book Club book that is Dune Messiah. He's looking very much forward to it. I already know. I am going to bore him to death with it. If you just can't get enough words about books and you need to know what's going on with us every moment, you can check us out on Twitter at WABpod. You can check our blog. I've always been saying for additional show notes and commentary, but I'm just kind of writing a lot of weird stuff out there now. So check out the blog, blog.wordsaboutbooks.ninja. And if you feel we deserve something extra, if you really like the show, you can check us out at buymeacoffee.com/WABpod. And I think that's it for my plugs, my mandatory ones. Mr. Scott, what are you working on?
I am working on my own podcast.
Oh, yeah?
That I'm not quite ready to announce yet. I need to get 3 or 4 episodes under my belt. But I'm looking at a shorter form, somewhere 20 to 30 minutes long.
Okay.
It's scripted, so it'll be very different. For now, it'll be just me. But if it were to take off, which you never know, maybe I'll get a chance to interview some people that would enjoy talking about the subject I'm going to cover.
Nice. So...
yeah.
Is there anywhere we can check you out until that comes out, or where they could go to see updates about that?
Well, they could check out brainfirecowboy.com.
Awesome.
I don't have any updates up there yet, but I need to get them up there. What is my Twitter handle? Why do I always never remember this? And show me my profile. It's at 1, that's the number 1, pizza_snail.
With that, I think we are ready to say good night.
Or there's cockroaches riding ducks like horses.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
I don't know
possible.
Where it is. It is possible. These are like Nate level comments here.
You're welcome.
Where did that thought come from?
I don't know.
How fast does a hippo run? That's going to be important for this episode.
No, I think it's more important. How fast can I run? If I can run faster than the hippo, I'm good. I doubt that I can. I think for periods, that for short bursts, they can run pretty quick.
Damn, dude.
He's not, but his 6-pack of abs is.
It's just Chris Hemsworth's torso.
You mean his Thorso?
His Chris Hemsworth's torso.
That's it.
Yes. Yes. We have arrived.
Oh, that's the one.